Well, it's 1 minute after 12, so I think we should start. But it's a small group today, so I may ask you to just introduce yourself so it's more of a conversation. But before I do that and introduce our speakers, let me tell you about 2 upcoming seminars. We haven't nailed down January yet. I have some ideas percolating, but it's not nailed down. But 2 that are nailed down to put on your calendars, 2 outside speakers. One on February 5th, Dr. Alex Crosby from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. He's their head honcho on suicide epidemiology. He will be here, and that's a joint seminar with the Preventive Medicine Seminar. So you may see it advertised either way, and it's the same one. I don't know, room or I think it'll be noon, but I'm not sure the room yet. And then on March 8th, we'll be hosting Andrea Gielen, who's a professor of Health and Behavioral Science at Johns Hopkins University and director of their Injury Control Research Center. And she does research on child injury of various types, hasn't picked a topic yet, but it will be in that domain somehow, and is a really top-notch speaker. So we hope you will be able to come to both those and spread the word. Today we have 2 guests who are sort of part of our larger family. Dr. Beverly Kingston, who is the director of the Center for the Study and Prevention of Violence at CU Boulder. She has her PhD in sociology from CU Boulder and is principal investigator of Safe Communities, Safe Schools, as well as the Youth Violence Center at Boulder. And her colleague, Dr. Sabrina Mattson, who is a project director at the Center for the Study and Prevention of Violence. It's a tongue twister. She also has her PhD in sociology from Boulder and is co-PI of the Safe Communities and Safe Schools project. So we asked them to come and give us an update on what they're working on. But before they do, since we're a small group, let's just do quick introductions so it becomes more of a conversation.
Did you say who you are?
Did I say who I am? I don't know. I'm Carol Runyon. Sorry. I'm Carol Runyon. At least I think I am today. I'm director of the Program for Injury Prevention, Education, Research, and faculty member in the School of Public Health.
I'm Marissa Mora, a student in the School of Public Health and a graduate assistant in the Program for Injury Prevention, Education, and Research.
And I'm Susan Marine, and I'm the chair of advocacy for the Suicide Prevention Coalition of Colorado. And I'm also a member of the Suicide Prevention Commission.
Excellent. And I'm Eric Siegel. I'm a pediatrician, adolescent specialist at Children's. I do violence prevention, research, and firearms stuff with these guys. I've been doing it for a while now, and with Carol as well.
I'm Michael Soto. I'm Dr. Siegel's research assistant, also care coordinator in their project as well.
And student in the School of Public Health?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
I'm a student in the non-degree seeking students in the Department of Epidemiology, School of Public Health. I'm an adjunct associate professor from San Diego State Epidemiology Center for Behavior and Epidemiology. I was founded by National Center for Injury Prevention Control on my dissertation on neighborhood correlates of partner violence with pregnancy in Alabama, and so injury has been my area of interest and also substance use disorder. So linking those 2 issues to look at strengthening community capacity, raising healthy kids in community.
Lori Lovedale, I'm Injury Prevention Specialist in Trauma Services at UC Health. Over there.
Whichever way, yeah. And back.
Oh, I'm just Pat. I'm the TSS guy who set up the video conference. I won't even be here in a few minutes. So.
You're welcome. Thank you for helping us.
Yeah.
I'm Dustin Hunter. I'm the school outreach consultant with the Colorado School Safety Center.
I'm Kennedy Hawkins. I'm a coordinator for the Sun Smart program at the Cancer Center, and we're just interested in what's going on in schools and trying to learn more about programs.
Great. Well, welcome everyone, and you're on. And let us know if you want questions as you go, or how you want to.
Okay. Well, we'll probably just kind of see how it goes. But for now, try to go, keep it going.
And we are taping, so
Okay.
that if you know other people who weren't able to make it today, it will be posted on our Piper website. Usually it takes a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having us. It's really a privilege to be here. And like Carl said, I'm going to be presenting with Sabrina Mattson, Arredondo Mattson, and we introduce ourselves often as partners in crime prevention, which I just love to say. And one of the things I did want to say at the beginning of this is that the project we're going to be describing is our Community Safe Schools project, and we have a National Institute of Justice very large grant, a $6.2 million 4-year grant that we'll be talking about today. And I wanted to start by saying a few things about when you get a grant, just for those of you who have had one it was just reflecting. It was 13 years ago that I got my first grant that I was the writer of, and it was our Robert Wood Johnson Active Living Research Grant, and we found out in December 2004. And it actually was getting that grant was what got me to finally finish my dissertation because I was going to have a job. It was very exciting. But do you know who James Salas is? So Salas, he does active living research and was over that funding source of Robert Wood Johnson. And on the call, I'll never forget what he said, as I was so excited, to get that funding and have a job. Because I wasn't sure what I was going to be doing. And I knew what that grant was, and I was really excited to work on it. And he said, this is the sweet time, the time when you get the award before it actually starts. and he was very seasoned, and those were very, very wise words. So I'll just say them to you, pass that on, and then it sort of frames our presentation a little bit. Okay, so here's what we're going to do today. We're going to provide an overview of the Safe Community, Safe Schools model. We're going to describe the evaluation of the model. And then actually 3, 4, and 5 are pretty short, but it will be accomplishments, lessons learned, and recommendations. Okay, so I'm going to start with a broad overview about a little bit about the model and about the study. So the study that we have from NIJ, and a few other things about it, is that we're one of 3 who received funding from the Comprehensive School Safety Initiative to do a comprehensive approach to school safety. So there's a lot of grants out there from NIJ that are through that CSSI funding, but in 2015, they had a call for a comprehensive approach to school safety, and we were one of 3 who got those awards. And when we hear what some of the other sites are doing, we're like, oh God, maybe we overshot in what we meant by comprehensive, but we still think it's pretty awesome and important, but it's been a struggle a little bit in that. But so here's our study. And so we're partnering with Colorado Front Range Middle Schools. We have actually 46 middle schools in our study to evaluate the feasibility and impact of the Safe Community, Safe Schools model. And we're using a staggered entry randomized control trial. Sabrina will give more details on the trial and the research, and I'll provide more of an overview about the model. And so our model, it was actually developed, I was part of the development when I was a grad student somewhat, by Dr. Del Elliott, who's our mentor, and he started working on Safe Community, Safe Schools right after Columbine. And it was very intentional. I was there back then when we named it Safe Community, Safe Schools. It was very intentional that we included community in there because schools can't do it alone and schools don't operate alone. However, that's hard to make those linkages. And so we kind of say we're on version 3.0. It's had different funding and different sources at different times, but this is the first time that we've had funding to do a randomized control trial. Not that we didn't want to test and evaluate the model, but we just didn't have the resources to do that. So what we're doing here is it's a comprehensive model, it's actionable, and it's individualized to the school's unique needs. And we really are about trying to support schools to understand and effectively implement the best things that we know from evidence but in a way that's matched to what they need, so that we're not just dumping our approach on them. We often talk about it as a co-creation. Our primary research questions are two. One is around implementation and one is around evaluation. So to what extent is our model implemented as intended in middle schools, and to what extent is the model effective? So, like I said, this is a big deal. And in order to do a comprehensive approach, we have a very large team. This is our main project team. We also have consultants like Dr. Siegel. We're using his violence risk screening tool in our surveys. And so we have consultants that we also work with often at different times and different points. But so this is a multidisciplinary team. Our institute at IBS, Institute of Behavioral Science, that's a very important thing to us, that we're focusing on complex social problems that can't be solved by one discipline. So we've got psychologists, we've got sociologists, public health. There's no one discipline education that can solve everything. And our team also has research partners and project partners we have actually two national research institutes. So ASU REACH is Tom Deshawn's group, and he works with us on doing a data dashboard. And American Institutes of Research, they're a national organization that helps with our evaluation, our external evaluators. We also work with PassageWorks, which is located in Boulder, but they're a national organization that are really around school-wide transformation. So they work with educators. That's what their background's been more, not as tied to school safety, but more about education and how do you transform that. So they really help us think about how to work with schools. And then, we also partner with Colorado Attorney General's Office and Safe to Tell. And both of those. And the Colorado School Safety Resource Center has also been a partner with us in this work as well. And I'm probably maybe missing someone. But so why a comprehensive approach? Why is this so important? And we often use this iceberg metaphor to talk about violence and to talk about the why behind a comprehensive approach. So we all know, I'm sure in this room, that violence is a problem in the U.S. and we're seeing more and more mass shootings, and they're frightening and they are alarming. And we just got quite a few calls after the Las Vegas shooting, and the media always asks us, what can we do? And usually that conversation is very narrow. But, they're actually kind of tired of the narrow conversation, and so they've asked us some more detailed questions, and I'm very pleased about that. But the mass shootings, the 24-hour news events, some last longer than 24 hours, but they usually kind of die down after about a week to 2 weeks, are the tip of the iceberg. And what's underneath that is a lot of hurting kids, a lot of hurting people. So, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the kids, but some of the numbers that we see consistently, 20 to 25% of kids in middle school report being bullied in the past 30 days. That's a pretty common number across surveys nationally. It's higher for kids that are more vulnerable, so kids that look different, are different in some way. It's also higher in some places. So some school climates are going to have higher rates than that 20 to 25. That's our average. And, I always talk about this stat because it's alarming to me, about the 18% of our high school students who have seriously considered suicide in the past year. That's a national CDC. That's from the YRBS numbers. Oh my God, that's almost 1 in 5. And then, 23%, and this is a YRBS number as well, 23% of high school kids report being in a fight at school in the past year. So, there's this underlying violence going on. So we've got to look at that. We can't just look at what's at the tip. We have to look at what are these stats underneath it. But then we got to go a level below that. What's going on that's causing those problems? And so that's addressing the root causes. And that's what a comprehensive approach is about. It's about addressing those underlying root causes. And it's complex. So I'm going to introduce you to the theoretical perspectives. It's probably not going to be an introduction to the group in this room because these should all be very familiar with to you, but let me just say a little bit about how we pull these together in our model, and then we really try to operationalize these perspectives so that they're not abstract theories, they're actually concrete, on the ground actions that we take. So the first is the ecological approach. So that means we're working at the individual, family, peer, school, community, nation, world, across all the levels. And what we want to do there is we want to have programs, practices, policies that are supportive to healthy development across all those levels. So that's sort of the big picture. We also take a developmental life course approach, and that means that we want to focus on key developmental periods. We're always thinking about not only the middle school context, even though that's this project, but healthy development from before kids are born throughout the life course, and making sure that we are putting things into place that support that healthy development. The third is the public health approach, and a few things around that. First, we focus on the key malleable risk and protective factors. So for this work, we focus on the key malleable risk and protective factors at school, especially trying to even hone in at the middle school level. And that's important information for school staff to know, because they don't have time to be researchers and to know what exactly are the key malleable risk and protective factors. So even delivering that information to schools is beneficial so that you get them honed in on the right areas and that they can change. And I'll say another part of that is also because sometimes schools can feel like there's nothing they can do. And this is so positive because there's so much that they can do. So that's one part of the public health approach, is to focus on the key risk and protective factors. A second is to take a hierarchical approach. And so that means what needs to be in place for everybody, what needs to be in place for those who are at risk, and what needs to be in place for those who are in trouble, who are, already exhibiting some of those problem behaviors. And the fourth area is really about systems thinking, because it's very important that we put in programs that we know work, but we also are working within a system, a complex system. And I know for me, if I'm not considering the whole system and the complexity of that, and just coming in and saying, let's put it in a program. We know it works. Let's put it in an evidence-based program. Well, this was me like 10 years ago when I got to grad school. I just got kind of knocked down by that, because I needed to pay attention to the actual context, to how overwhelmed some of the systems are, what's going on, what are people motivated to work on, do they have the capacity to do that? So there's a whole body of research around that. But systems thinking also says, in order to change a system, we have to see it. And so how do we help people see the system? And so we think about that in our work as well. Oh, and I did want to say one other thing about the public health approach is that we take a public health approach even to our planning processes. And so that means that we define the problem, we use data to define the problem, and that we also put into place or make recommendations to look at programs that have the best available evidence, programs, practices, and policies with the best available evidence. And then we want to evaluate what we're doing. So we're always doing a planning process like that as part of the public health approach. And everything that we do at the center kind of involves this kind of a model and framework. So why middle school? And we think that the Safe Community, Safe Schools model, it could work in elementary, middle, or high. And we've always talked about it that way. But we were very strategic with this grant to select middle school as our focus. Middle school in development is a critical time in development. It's a time when risk factors for nearly everyone, when you look at the population data, increase, and protective factors decrease. Even in the best case scenarios, it's like this. So this is me in 1980 at Bernie Middle School. This is my school picture. I was in 8th grade. And I share this. Why middle school, some of you know this about me a little bit already, but is very important to me. It was a really hard time for me. I was very small. My birthday is December 1st. So it's right on the deadline, and I always was small, so I was kind of like a year behind everybody. And my 7th grade year was hell. You know, I was just called a loser every single day. That was the time that the Little River Band came out with that Lonesome Loser song. And it was a really rough time, you know, and I've really been thinking so much about it. And it wasn't a long time that bullying happened. It was around that whole 7th grade year. And I figured out kind of some ways to get it to end. And I never told anyone. And I did have a lot of protective factors in my life at that time. I had a best friend who lived next door, and my parents were supportive, but I never told them about what was going on. And I really know for my own self that it had some lifelong consequences. And, you know, and for many, many people, there's lots of research around the lifelong consequences of bullying, being a bully, and being a victim. So our model, the Safe Community, Safe Schools model, has 2 critical areas of focus. And this is sort of the strands. If you do a literature review around school safety, you're going to see sort of these 2 strands emerging. And they're not always talked about together in the way that we've put them together, but we think that it's valuable to look at it this way. And first is a positive school climate. So what do we mean about what does that mean? It's a climate that feels safe, that students are physically and emotionally safe. They're supported. There's opportunities for meaningful engagement and involvement. But there's also, in addition to those supports, there's also informal social controls. So it's really important. Jane Jacobs, who was an urban planner, talked a lot about eyes on the street. Eyes on the street, that builds healthy communities. You know, when you're watching out for each other, really watching out. Well, it's the same thing in schools, that we want not only the staff to watch out for the school climate, but the students as well, so that everybody's engaged, not in like punitive way, but in like, we're here together to build this positive school climate. And the second strand is really around information gathering. And by information gathering, I kind of think about it a lot at 2 different levels. And the first level is we want to make sure that we gather information on kids that are hurting, you know, on that population of kids that are hurting. And so there's some excellent screening and assessment tools. There's training, there's ways that everyone in the school can, again, have their eyes on the street, their eyes on the hallways, their eyes on kids, and they can be watching out for the warning signs and red flags. And there can be systems in schools that are built out to watch out for those hurting kids, those warning signs and red flags. You know, if you think back, for my own story, I was one of those hurting kids. I would have completely gone under the radar. I did fail several classes in 7th grade, and I failed math, and so there were some outward warning signs, but no one really knew what was all the way going on. We kind of just said it was a bad teacher. And I was quiet, so nobody would know. And so there's a lot of the externalizing behaviors that gets a lot of attention, but you don't always watch out for the kind of quiet suffering that other kids have. And so how do we set up our systems to watch out for that? So that's kind of one strand of information gathering. The second is around collecting data on your school climate and about the problem behaviors. And Sabrina will talk more about that. But, you know, if you don't know what's going on, you don't know what to address and to set those priorities. Okay, so I want to give you guys a minute right now. Before I do that, I want to say this. So we know so much about what works. And I want to read something to you. This is one of the things that it just shocks me. But this is the preface from the Surgeon General's report in 2001. And this was written by the Surgeon General at that time. Dr. Del Elliott was the scientific editor on that report. And this is what they knew then. And this is going to kind of set up this question in just a second. But this is what it says. Our review of the scientific literature supports the main conclusion of this report, that as a nation, we possess knowledge and have translated that knowledge into programs that are unequivocally effective in preventing much serious youth violence. So this was 2001, and that we knew what worked. And we're still struggling. We're still not putting those things into practice. So I'd like what you to do right now is take 1 minute individually first and write down what do you think is the answer to this question? Why isn't what we know works from research being translated into practice? So I'm just going to give you 1 minute. Or you can think if you don't have anything to write with, but I'm going to ask you then to get with a partner too. Okay, if you can find one person and just we'll take another about 1.5 minutes to share what you have, or you can do 3 if you need to.
And then I think also the financial aspect of things. Because all of these we're involved in doing this. Yeah. It's a lot of money and resources, people resources. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to bring you back because I know some of you are done. And does anyone want to throw out anything?
Sure. I mean, we talked about, we'd had a recent conversation with people from the CDC about this very issue of why don't people take their guidance and put it into practice. And so some of the things we talked about is, CDC was saying to us, well, people may not know how to do it. Mm-hmm. We all know there's not enough money and people to help with the translation process. But there's also perhaps a problem that people don't necessarily see issues as solvable.
Yeah. That's too complex. Yeah, there's a book called The Watchman's Rattle. Have you ever heard of that book? That is about this why people don't shut down, why they shut down when dealing with some of these complex issues. So it's a good resource. Are there anything else people want to share?
We talked about, I said, I think there's stigma, like around poverty, which kind of falls into that. And people don't really want to address the root issue of how you would actually get at that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of stuff becomes political. When you talk about violence, guns always come into that, and then it's like there's this wall, and then you can't get anywhere because you can't talk about the real issues. And I think that's a huge barrier. I think you had mentioned research.
So if something potentially valuable in the clinical population setting, then public health prevention services task force will say, hey, you are this category evidence, you don't have the strong evidence. That's the implementation gap we want to address. We want to have that wide skills, evidence to show. Then they put these barriers there that we cannot research process cycles couldn't move into, leverage funding and use the time to accumulate evidence to move this field forward. So that's become barrier. So did that become who noticed that barrier and then who really addresses barrier? We need to talk through. It's not someone's personal or that interest group's interest. It's public interest.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you guys for thinking about that. So that's the Safe Community, Safe Schools model is trying to kind of find a way in to answer that question. And so we have, and we're working, directly with middle schools. So trying to take what we know from research and put it into actual practice. And so our model had 3 core components, and we use the stool, the 3 legs of the stool, to illustrate those 3 core components. And the first is engaging schools and communities. The second is the information gathering, and the third is building out this evidence-based multi-tiered system of supports. And I'll talk a little bit more about each of those. And then we also have this implementation roadmap, which is basically, it's kind of like Communities That Care, if you're familiar with that, and using a planning framework like Communities That Care, or like I talked about earlier in the public health planning process, to move schools through, using their data, setting their goals, setting priorities, and creating a plan. So we'll walk through that a little bit more in just right now. So the core component 1 is around engaging schools and communities. And the way we do that is we work with an existing school team, or they form a school team, and we kind of call it a broad school safety team. And many of the schools have some sort of a team, but then we have specific tasks for that team. And we see our partnership with that team as researchers is a very co-creative process. So we work in partnership with those teams, and and I'm sure all of you have had experiences of being on teams that function well and don't function well. And in order for this to work, it's like this school climate doesn't just magically appear. It's a reflection of all the micro interactions. And so we see that team being sort of that unit of change. So helping to ensure that they have healthy team processes, helping to ensure that we, as our research team, have healthy team processes. So at every level, trying to, make sure we have this, we're modeling and doing healthy team processes, and we're all human. So this is extremely challenging. And not only that, we're all human, but we're also across multiple disciplines. We have multiple personalities, different learning styles. So it's a challenge in the research team. It's a challenge in the school teams, especially working across so many different schools. But I just wanted to say that we're really focused on making sure that those teams function well, that the teams they use data to make decisions. So one of the findings of Communities That Care, that what mattered in their coalitions, what was it in Communities That Care coalitions that mattered more than not Communities That Care coalitions? And it was this adoption of a scientific approach of prevention science. When you start using data to make decisions, that can be a sustainable practice. And so that's one of the things we're really working on with the teams. And then, of course, the team will develop, along with their school, but they're the leaders in the development and implementation of the school action plan. And you can see that guiding quote. That's not just a quote on the slide. That is a guiding, those who create commit, is a guiding principle of our work.
Are you okay with questions as you go?
I just am worried about time because I'm long-winded. Sabrina's very short-winded, but hold the questions. And I want her to have enough time.
Sure.
Okay. So the second core component, the second leg of the stool, again, we need all 3 legs so the stool doesn't fall over, is this information gathering. And so this is how we remember that information gathering We had positive school climate and information gathering. This is how we operationalize it in our model. We have systems to identify the early warning signs for youth. We use the data collection at both at the student and school levels. We have these systems around that to identify both strengths and challenges that then guide the creation of that school action plan and inform the decisions about what programs and strategies they're going to select. And then, of course, we use that data to monitor progress at the individual student level and at the school level. And the third core component this is where we bring in that hierarchical framework. And this is nothing, new at all, but it's like, how do we actually make it happen? And, we have PBIS, positive behavioral intervention and supports in many of our schools in Colorado. We have multi-tiered system of supports language as well. And so each of those different kinds of frameworks is all sort of this framework. And so we try to align our work with this. But we're trying to build an evidence-based multi-tiered system of supports in each of the schools. And it's this system that will help to create that positive school climate. So it's strategies at Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. And then each school in our model, as of right now, because we have this grant, receives funding to select a blueprint program that is matched, that they look at their data, they look at their risk and protective factors, and they select a blueprint program that's matched to their unique needs. And so one of the reasons we really think that this model will be effective is because we're supporting schools to strategically select an evidence-based program. We're working with them on readiness, capacity, making sure that it's a good fit, and then providing implementation supports. So they can choose a blueprint program. They may choose something that's at the universal level. And so then what about the other two tiers? What's in place for those? So we have them develop out a school action plan that considers all three tiers and sets goals, realistic goals based on those areas, because oftentimes you can't do everything. Getting a program off the ground and launched, a blueprint program at schools, sometimes is the most a school can take on at once. So we're very mindful of that and trying to figure out that sweet spot, because some schools want to tackle multiple things, and we want to help them to do that. So in addition to the blueprint program, we also have, in all this work we've done on school safety, what we call these foundational areas of school safety. And those include mental health supports, and we think about mental health supports very broadly. They also include bystander response and reporting and threat assessment. And what often happens in schools is all that stuff is like required and important, but it's like not thought about together. And we're trying to develop out cohesive plans at the middle school level that link all these efforts together, because the same things that you do to create a positive school climate, many of those same things are what will make your bystander response and reporting system work really well. It'll help your mental health and referral system flow. And so anyway, I'm going to not say too much about that because I want Sabrina to have a turn. And then just in general, this is some overall information about what the schools receive. So this is kind of broad, but they get training. At least we do 3 days with them per year. We also have monthly meetings with their school team and also calls in between. They get technical assistance, coaching, the evidence-based program, and the data collection tools and dashboard, and some other things as well. But and then, as I said, we have the implementation roadmap, which takes them through these 5 phases. And it's not exactly linear or perfectly circular, but we use the data to identify the gaps. That's the number 2. They create a plan. They receive supports to implement the plan, and then they evaluate the impact, and then we kind of keep going around. So it's a basic planning process. And I'm going to skip that slide, and then I'm going to just end with, my part's going to end here with this slide. And so we've realized that there's not only research questions, there's also these, you might have heard that term before, wicked questions. And these are questions that we're struggling and like pushing right at the edge to figure out. And the first is, how do we engage and empower school teams and bring forward the expertise of the Safe Communities, Safe Schools research team at the same time? So how do we hear the on-the-ground wisdom of the schools and blend that with the research? Wicked question. How do you carry out this complex, comprehensive approach within the limited time frame and available resources? We see this as a 4-year project with schools to really build up that capacity. It is not a quick fix. It is not. It is not. And so, the way that the funding works is it's like all about quick fix, all about like 1 year. What can you do in 1 year? And this is long-term capacity building. So that's the second. And then the third is, how do you have a tailored, individualized approach to each school's needs while still holding true to an overall model? So those are our wicked questions. And I'm going to turn it over to Sabrina.
Thank you, Beverly.
Do you have the wicked answers?
No. Maybe in our old age we'll have some wicked answers. So as Beverly mentioned earlier, we're using a staggered entry randomized control trial and mixed methods to evaluate the Safe Communities, Safe Schools model. And the researchers from the American Institutes of Research are conducting our evaluation. They are using the randomized control trial to answer the second question, the effectiveness question, and we're using mixed methods to look at the implementation of the model. The evaluation is being guided by this logic model. And as you can see on this side of the logic model, we have our long-term outcomes of creating a safe school environment where we're focusing on decreasing problem behaviors and mental health concerns, and then increasing pro-social behaviors. We hypothesize that if we implement the Safe Communities, Safe Schools model successfully, including the 3 core components and the implementation roadmap, that we would have an influence on the direct areas of intervention, which are our short-term outcomes here that include things that Beverly talked about, like the healthy school teams, effective collaboration on the teams and between our research and practitioner teams. Those direct areas of intervention would then have an influence on positive school climate and measures such as having respectful and supportive relationships, increasing school bonding. And then increases in school climate could either have a direct effect or an indirect effect on the risk and protective factors that we're focusing on to reduce those problem behaviors. And you can see that there are a variety of arrows going a variety of different ways. It's a complex model. So this staggered implementation is not what we originally designed. The numbers look a little funny, but as Beverly said, nothing ever goes as planned, and I always expect to be surprised. So when we first started our project, we had our original design called for 2 cohorts of 16 schools that would stagger in yearly. And our initial recruitment period was about 4 months, started in January, and we didn't have enough time. So we started with 20 schools, and we lost 10 because of IRB issues and other things that were difficult to manage in that first year. We were flying the plane while we were building it. And so we ended up with 5 schools, and in retrospect, or five intervention schools and 5 control schools in that first year, and it has been a blessing, actually. So year 2, we had a longer recruitment. We started recruiting in the summer of our first year of the project, and we had until the next May to finalize recruitment. We learned, we we learned our lessons about timing, the IRB, and made sure that we had all our ducks in a row. So we had great recruitment. We decided to increase our numbers. Our original goal was 32, and because of potential schools dropping out, we increased our numbers to 46. And so as you can see, the first set of schools, so the staggered implementation part happens where 5 schools, the 5 schools in year 1 will start the intervention in year 3. So that's why we have 23 schools in year 3. And then the 18 comparison group schools in year 2 will start the intervention in year 4. So all schools will receive the intervention by year 4. The comparison group receives, they administer our climate surveys, they receive a $1,000 stipend per year, and then we obtain the CDE data from their schools every year as well. So as we try to make sure that we maximize the data that we use for our model as well as for the evaluation. So we administer school climate surveys to students and staff, and we use those school climate surveys to help guide their interventions, and we use those for our evaluation as well. We have successfully obtained, we're going to get school official data from CDE, so we don't have to bother the schools to get their data. It was a huge accomplishment. I think 10 hours of being at the board, asking for the data. It was very painful, but much needed.
It'll
So
save you more than 10 hours in the long run, probably.
that's a really good point, Carol. And then we're also collecting data on the readiness of schools. We're using Wandersman and Scacia's readiness assessment to help us understand how to improve schools' readiness, as we realize that's an important component of implementation. We're finalizing a safe and healthy school assessment, which includes the key elements of school safety that Beverly was talking about earlier. And then by the end of the project, we'll develop a milestones and benchmarks instrument that will help us understand how schools are doing and are they meeting the benchmarks that they should be for our model. And then the other measure that we're using to help with our process evaluation is our blueprint observations, to the extent they're appropriate for the program that they're implementing.
What does that, can you just say a tiny bit more about what that means?
Sure. So if the school is implementing life skills, for example, then we have an observer, a paid observer, go into the classroom. They'll get a list of the classes, the life skills classes that are being offered that semester, and they'll randomly show up to a classroom and just observe and rate the teacher on the lesson, for example. And we're observing, I believe, a random sample of the teachers, like 20% of the teachers in a random sample of their classrooms. But not all of the programs have an observable classroom or lesson, for example. So we're using this mixed method approach to understand the implementation. We'll look at the fidelity of the model, the feasibility of implementing the model, whether educators think it's an acceptable model, and the perceived benefit of the Safe Communities, Safe Schools model. We're using monthly implementation logs that the school coordinator completes. AIR will do a document review of our case notes. They'll use staff surveys and structured staff interviews with the educators on the project to understand how the implementation is going. And then for a couple of outcome measures, I have a couple of slides up here just to show you the kind of school data, official data surveys that we're using to to look at whether we've achieved our outcomes. So we're using classroom suspensions, expulsions, those types of things that we're getting from CDE. The school climate survey includes measures of delinquency, aggression, bullying, teen dating, violence, weapon carrying. And the staff climate survey includes perceived problem behaviors from the staff to look at our outcome of decreased problem behaviors amongst students. And then when we look at our outcome of pro-social behaviors, we have less measures, but we're looking at test scores from CDE for all the schools in attendance. And then we have measures of interactions with pro-social peers, involvement in school activities, community activities, and unfortunately we don't have any measures on our staff climate survey for pro-social behaviors. So just a few things on our accomplishments. As Beverly said, we've taken it from proposal to making it real, and it has been a challenge, but we're getting there. We're in almost our second year. We're at the end of our second year. Wow. And I think between both Beverly and I, and having gone through version 1 and version 2 of the Safe Communities, Safe Schools model, we really figured out that we have to build trusting relationships with schools. And the first year, that's one of the goals of the first year, is really to build those healthy teams, but also to build that trust between those teams so that they understand we're just not coming in to tell them what to do. All schools in Cohort 1 have selected blueprint programs based on their data, and they're starting the implementation of their blueprint programs this year, the fall of this year. And as you would expect, one of them is not going as planned. I think they're going to delay a year, but they have selected the programs. Cohort 2 is in the phase on that implementation roadmap where they're collecting their data. So most of the schools have completed their student and staff baseline surveys and their readiness assessment. And we're in the process of compiling all those data, and we have a meeting in January to give them their results, and they'll prioritize their risk and protective factors and problem behaviors that they want to focus on. We have learned over the years how important the response rates are, and we continue to work with schools to make sure that they achieve, our goal is an 80% response rate, and for most of our schools we're getting about 70%, which is pretty good considering we have to get active consent. One of the measures on the readiness assessment from Wandersman and Scatia is a joy scale, and so that's one of the highest measures on the readiness assessment for some of the schools. So that gives both Beverly and I happiness too, joy. Our implementation managers really stepped up to the plate and had a really successful recruiting effort to get those that second year cohort of schools. I think we even had a waiting list. So, and then in our first year, we think it's important to really publish on the model and get that information out there. We were at our National Institute of Justice meeting, and they really wanted us to start to publish what we're doing, get the word out, and so we submitted the theoretical paper to a journal, and we're in the revise and resubmit phase. So we've learned a lot of things, and as I said previously, that positive, trusting relationship with schools is important at every level. It makes a lot of sense. I had a professor who his main thing was it's all about trust, and I keep seeing it in every project and aspect of my life. And I think the other thing we've really learned is that the schools are at so many different places, and they have very different needs, and yet at the same time they're very similar. So how do we keep their needs front and center and still use a comprehensive approach to address their challenges? And we also need that, it's, as Beverly said, that scientific prevention science, sort of bridging research and practice. How do we make sure they understand why are they doing what they're doing, and make sure that they understand the theories at a very basic level so that they can implement the project in a meaningful way. And they understand why we need high response rates, why we have to use so many measures. So that's been a continued challenge, so that we can make sure that they find meaning in the work that we're doing, they find meaning in the research questions, and they're actionable, so they see small progress along the way. And then we continue to see how important buy-in and leadership is, from the principals to the district, at the district level. There's a lot of research on it. We continue to see it, in all of our projects. So a few recommendations for doing this type of work. A longer planning pilot period is essential. And I think if we write more grants, when we write more grants, we will fill that in, make sure that happens. We're working with schools right now on helping them understand their readiness, and there's not a lot of time given what we're doing, but it's so important for them to at least acknowledge where they are in terms of readiness. Do they have the staff capacity to implement this model? Are people motivated to do this model? Do they have people in the teams that aren't really excited about it, but they have to do it? And if that's the case, how do we work with them to move them past that stage? And then I think just at every basic level, we have to continue to remember that we want to use a comprehensive approach. We want to make sure that we cross a variety of contexts to really make this work. That's it.
I'll just say one quick thing about that last point, and that is we have a real opportunity in the state of Colorado right now to align this work across contexts because of the statewide implementation of communities that care in 48 communities. So, if you think about if schools are doing the comprehensive approach and communities are, and we can connect those, I'm making a point to say this to all of you because you may be involved in some of that. So I think we have a real opportunity to not only have that be words on a page, but something that we can really make happen in the state.
So any questions? You had a question for Beverly earlier.
Well, I have a whole bunch of questions, but because I was just yesterday afternoon with a group that's trying to design comprehensive approaches to suicide prevention for the state. Jared Hyman and his group. And so, and one of the issues that we were trying to think through is how do decide with communities what's right for the community to get people who may not be used to using data to rely on the evidence rather than just what they've always been doing. And so it's very parallel to what you're doing. And I was just sitting here trying to think, okay, what question can I formulate? I want to know it all. How do we do this? But are there specific lessons you learned in trying to get these schools who weren't necessarily thinking about the problem the same way you were to get over that hump?
I find that they're apprehensive at first to look at the data, and then when they see the data and they see the summary scales and they can see the connections and that it resonates with them, then I think they start to trust the data, and then they can see that our model might be something that they could use. But I think it does take time. And I don't use an approach where I tell them what's going on in the school. I ask them, is does this make sense to you? And they're like, oh yeah, those 7th graders, they're bullying, and so it does make sense. And then when there's questions about the data, I remember in one meeting there was a few different key people there, and one of the counselors said, gosh, that many kids are using alcohol, and I think it was the AP who said, oh yeah, they were in here last month for that. So I think it takes time to kind of make the data real for them.
That is it right there. I think making how you bring it to life, and it's a co-creative process, and this is something that this is a way longer conversation, but figuring out ways. We've been using liberating structures. I don't know if you guys have heard of those approaches, but they're like micro social processes to help groups to work together. And so some of those processes can help. You could use around data, looking at data. We had a big data meeting yesterday, and we were talking about even sometimes, like if you look at like a numbers, let's say 5% of the kids at your school stayed home the past 30 days because they didn't feel safe on their way to and from school. Well, 5% can look like a really low number, but then if you start to say it's 5% of, maybe you're looking at that data across the district, 5% of the kids across the district, and you turn that into a number, then that can become more meaningful. So there's just like different ways, but it's different ways to bring it to life. I think that's the best.
But I think it does take time and trust, for sure.
You talked a little bit about like gauging schools' readiness for this kind of program and kind of moving them along that continuum. Was there any criteria for schools enrolling in the study? And what was that?
We did actually we rated them on readiness before we selected which ones would be included. And in the first year, we left off a couple that didn't seem ready. One of the things that we used was the principal in the meeting, the meeting where we talked about our project. And then you can kind of tell, so we rated them on, I think, 3 items that we might have taken from, I think, the readiness assessment. And we did the same for the second cohort, and we had a waiting list. So,
and we also spent a significant time with each school. So, in terms of the recruiting, we had a meeting with each of the school teams so that they knew what they were going to get themselves into, that it wasn't a simple thing. And so some schools at that meeting would be like, no, this was really a good fit for us. And others would, did find it to be better. So we spent significant resources on that.
Just a comment in time. So Beverly and Sabrina mentioned this, but they've been doing the Safe Community Safe School work has been going on for 13 years. Mm-hmm. So this is this major, or more than that?
Yes, since 2000.
2000, oh yeah. So this is the RCT that they're describing, but I think you have provided data to how many schools have engaged in the process?
Gosh, almost 200 probably.
So 200 schools. Any reflection as to what they do? Because this is an intensive intervention, obviously. It's structured by the academic team partnering with the schools. But the 200 schools who have engaged in this, what have they done with that data? Is there knowledge of that?
Sure. So often I will provide recommendations about programs that they can use to address their challenges. Sometimes one of the cruxes in our work, what we thought before was we needed funding to pay for those blueprint programs, and it's not just the funding. So oftentimes the schools don't have the funding to implement the recommended programs that we recommend, and I think it's really that bridging research and practice. They want to do the quick, easy fix program, and they'll do that. So it's really working with them to implement a comprehensive model that is evidence-based. So oftentimes they don't do much with it. But I have worked with some schools who they'll use our survey over time, and then they'll implement an evidence-based program. And when they do, they see results.
Yeah, I wonder how, with what Carol mentioned, working with the state, so it's already, there's lots of schools out there that are collecting their data and reflecting data and reflecting on it, so how that would fit in with your...
Yeah, because I mean, what the state's trying to do in suicide is to work within selected counties with multiple types of organizations, which adds another layer of complexity. I mean, it's one thing, schools may think about things differently from the hospitals, from the mental health centers, from the sheriff's department, from whatever. So getting everyone on the same page.
Really using CTC, I mean, if you're going community by community, that would be a great process to try to implement in terms of the statewide level.
You know, I hope to learn more about that.
Yeah.
I think it helps that they get to choose the program as well. Makes a big difference because we're not telling them what to do. We make recommendations. They choose. Yes.
You should give them a menu to choose from.
Evidence-based, yeah.
And you kind of talked about not the tension, but the collaboration involved and like their expertise being on the ground, and then you coming in as like professional researchers. How does that process work in choosing the program they actually roll out?
Right. So it's a good balance, right? I think if we let them choose, they want to pick something that they just went to a conference on, and so it's our job to say if you implement these programs, you can see a reduction in up to 50% in bullying, or 20% in problem behaviors. So it's really blending their expertise with our expertise to kind of get them to the right place. And sometimes they already know what they want to do, and so we have to consider: can they do it? Do they want to do it? And so it's just, and if they implement one of these evidence-based programs, they will touch on multiple problem behaviors anyway, so it might be just fine to let them do what they want to do anyway.
So from a practical standpoint, in terms of resources and staff and funding, how many small rural schools do you have in your study? Because realistically, in our state, there are many.
So I would say about a quarter of them are small rural schools. That map shows we go all the way to Pueblo and close to Fort Collins. And actually versions 1 and 2 probably worked more with the rural schools than the inner Denver metro area schools, because the Denver metro area has more resources and they use their own surveys. So my experience in the last version was with more rural schools. Yes?
It's so nice to see the program, this type of effort has been there. So I want to find out if substance use disorder type of behaviors were those type of data collected, and is there a possibility to leverage funding such as from NIAA, NIDA, CDC on related area to fund this type of effort in the school level? Seems like Dr. Elliott, he was funded by NIAA and NIH. This morning I was in the CDPHE, OPH and the CDPHE have been recently funded for another 5 years. So they gave money to adolescents, screening, prevention, refer to treatment, school-based health center project. So they, when SAMHSA funded Colorado for 10 years, as per in Colorado, then they transitioned to next 5 years for school setting, school-based health centers. So there's for substance use related screening, prevention, refer. So this could be linked together too for your efforts.
I think Beverly's really good at that. She's
I just wrote those down. That's really good points. And yes, we do focus on substance use. That I don't know how clear we were about this, but and I know most of you in this room will already know that so many of the same risk and protective factors affect these multiple problem behaviors. And so this is again, if we address those key malleable risk and protective factors, we can impact suicide, we can impact violence, we can impact substance use, and we can help our kids live to their fullest potential. That's the flip side of it. So we just need to be strategic and aligned, and so it's exciting to see that you're going to bring the state partners together around the suicide. But let's hopefully not lose sight that these things are all connected,
Right.
and that it's
Well,
not.
We should talk further.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I know we're way over.
Yeah, I just realized that we're over time, and I don't know if somebody's about to rush into this room,
Okay.
but
One person
we
was.
should.
One person was on.
Oh, so there may be a class in here, but thank you so much for your presentation, and it's a lot of really good stuff. But I completely appreciate